Welcome to the Future of Surrogacy, the podcast that explores the people, the innovations, and the ideas building the next generation of surrogacy. Today's guest is Adam Winder, one of the earliest architects of technology in surrogacy. As founder and CEO of SeedTrust's, Adam helped redefine what financial stewardship and transparency could look like in surrogate compensation. He went on to help build Orchid, the journey management and matching platform, and has contributed significantly to the process of improving medical records through Gather. Adam has been ahead of the curve in nearly every major category of surrogacy technology, and today he joins us to talk about what he saw before others did, how technology has reshaped surrogacy, and what he believes is coming next. So with that, welcome to the Future of Surrogacy, Adam.
Hey, Erin, thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, we're excited. And I think it's worth letting all of the listeners know that we are recording this in the wake of at least me just finding out about what was going on with Surro Connections. So I'm grateful for your time because I know this is a very busy time for you.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure to be here.
Great. Okay. So starting from the very beginning, I've heard your story. I know that Brock was the one that kind of stumbled on the opportunity with one of his clients, but I'm curious if you remember, because at that point you hadn't had any experience with surrogacy or you were unfamiliar with the category. And so I'm curious if you remember how he positioned it to you to get you to jump from what was presumably a very, very good job at a very big bank.
Yeah, I had a really good career in banking, and I loved what I did at the bank and what I learned while working at the bank. I think that experience allowed the foundation for me to have the impact here. I don't think it was Brock's pitch. If you've ever met Brock,
Heaven.
pitching is not something he's good at. He's your classic CPA. The time of me stepping down from the bank to go full time into SeedTrust happened to be right around the time when I got to hold my daughter for the first time.
Mm.
I'd already been around SeedTrust, thinking about the space and advising on it. But honestly, after I got to hold my daughter, and the purpose of it really made sense to me. It went from a business where there was potentially a need where we could solve a problem to true purpose that resonated with me.
Clearly, there's a mission orientation inside you, but there's the business opportunity was good too.
Yeah, look, we saw that there was a market where things were being done in a very old way that wasn't secure, wasn't transparent, that desperately needed to be improved. And we also saw it as a growing market that was going to need such advancement. So at the time and the decision to make the transition, it was still a very cottage industry. It was much smaller than even it is today. That was the decision. There's a need here. This is being done really poorly. It can be really impactful and meaningful. I had no idea what we were stepping into in terms of what it was going to take to change it. And the pitchforks and what followed that decision. Your question, I looked at it from a business strategy need standpoint, very pragmatically, and I underestimated the emotional and relationship elements that exist in this space.
Yeah.
So what we brought to the market and what we knew had to come to this market was clearly the best solution and the right answer. What I underestimated was the emotional connection to the old way of doing things and the relationships associated that made advancing the better model easy, right? Or as it should have been. When we went from the flip phone to the smartphone, it went quick. We delivered the new better solution, and it took time for people to adopt it. And I look back at that and say, well, look, part of that is change is hard.
Yeah.
The other part of it is being new to this industry, you're not naturally trusted.
Yes.
Because of the fraud that's happened and that we have seen bad actors. So the industry takes everybody through this period of vetting of what is your intent? Who are you? Are you going to do good? And I think that just took time.
That does take time. Okay, so but this was 10 years. You guys just turned 10, right?
Yeah, we did.
Okay, well, congratulations. That's a big milestone.
Yeah, it's been quite the amazing journey.
And so you have seen a significant amount of growth, I'm sure, in the last 10 years. Is there anything that just is like the one thing that stands out the most to you or most meaningful in those 10 years?
Oh, look, the industry has grown. It's been in a growth phase I think if I look holistically at the field, what's changed? Well, look, there's been some consolidation with private equity around some of the clinics and some agencies, and you've seen the emergence of mega agencies, which didn't exist when we first started. But you still have a split between really large agencies, mega agencies, large, medium, small, boutique. And I think you'll always have that dynamic in this space because there is a lower barrier to entry. And also, some parents and surrogates want to work with a large agency, and some want to work with a smaller agency and have that more personal relationship with the owner. So I think that dynamic will always exist, but I do think we'll continue to see some consolidation in the emergence of like larger agencies and companies doing matching, as we've seen in the clinics. Technology has been a big forefront for the industry. I remember, SeedTrust became popular because we saw that this business could only work at the price point with technology and scale.
Right.
So that was kind of when we looked at the original days of escrow, what was being done, in my opinion, was a facade of security. Escrow companies were holding the money, but the agencies had full authority and they weren't actually checking anything. They didn't have any bonds, they didn't have any security, and actually their agreement just said they held the money and did whatever the agency said. So there actually wasn't they weren't adding any true value to protect the parents or the surrogates because whatever was requested then they did. So and at the price point of what it was then, and it's not much different now, what we try to do is say, well, look, that service doesn't actually add value. It doesn't actually protect people. It doesn't protect the surrogate. The escrow business should be modeled after like a trust company where they have to monitor the money per the contract and take the responsibility to verify the receipts in the contract to make sure the money's managed fairly so the parents can't be taken advantage of, nor can the surrogate.
Hmm.
This was a very novel concept back then. People thought we were crazy. Now it's the norm, but the only way we were able to do that was technology because we needed to be able to do that at the same price point. People were offering the very limited service.
Right.
So the way we did that was with creating technology to make us more transparent, more efficient. That was both client-facing improvements, but also operational improvements.
Hmm.
And we started that technology revolution in the field. And that trend has continued. Now I look up and there's a whole lot of technology companies in the space bringing newer technologies. And I think that expectation of better technology around what agencies are doing, what all providers are doing, and whoever's going to figure out how to connect them all to where it's even a better experience is going to be the continued trend that I'm seeing. And that's the trend in the world right now. Technology is going to change everything.
Yeah, I mean, the vision that you have had throughout this 10 years has been correct in
Well,
terms of pain points to solve.
I would love to say it's our vision. I'm such a visionary. We just listen to the market and try to solve
Yeah.
problems. With SeedTrust, given our backgrounds, we clearly saw the risk and the need for it to evolve.
Yeah.
That was something that didn't exist that was truly needed. And we knew what we needed to do to make it work. And we worked really hard at it. And we got it wrong a bunch and we kept adjusting. We kept learning, we kept adjusting everything. The service model, the technology, how we operate. And that's just a function of knowing what's right and doing the right thing, but also listening to the market of what they need and what they want, and then adjusting to do it and do it well and do it consistently. With Orchid, with the software company, the journey management platform, we weren't visionaries. We had 20 agencies that say, gosh, what you built for Seed Trust was really cool and amazing. Can you build something like this for us? And we
Yeah.
kept saying no until eventually we said yes, right?
Yes.
And then we realized how big of a project it was.
Yes.
And, I guess almost 7 years later, here we are. So, and then Gather was a similar scenario where it came to us of a very challenging business that we could try to take over and make it work and make it better. And that's what we're doing there. So our model is if there's a meaningful problem and we think we can solve it with technology and an awesome team, then that's what we try to do.
Okay, so this gets us to what's going on right now. Can walk us through kind of the difference between attorney and agency, and then what has to be at a third party provider in order to make it sound.
Yeah, for sure. I like to think of, I guess for me, a framework everybody can look to is would you trust this entity to hold your money as a bank, right? I mean, basically, an escrow company in our field is operating as a very sophisticated and complicated financial company, holding funds and managing lots of payments between very specific contract items So there's a lot of complexity to it in today's world. When we entered the space 10 years ago and they were simply holding funds and putting a check in the mail once a month, it was not complex. But escrow is taking a much broader role and a more complex role and a critical role that actually adds value and protects everybody. So the people operating and the escrow companies operating have to be able to manage that complexity successfully and securely. So what are the different models out there? There's really three that you alluded to. One is attorney held escrow. The other one is agency held escrow, which is fewer and fewer. And then there's the independent third-party escrow providers. In my opinion, despite which category you fall into, you should have to meet the threshold of enough security and infrastructure in place to manage people's money. Whether you're an attorney, an independent, or an agency, there's certain things that should be in place to manage people's money. So I will tell you, and we'll get into that in a second. I say no matter which model you're in, you should meet a minimum requirement. And depending on which model you're in, that should actually be even higher. But let's talk about each model and some of the differences. The attorney held, which is typically the intended parent's attorney held escrow, evolved organically. There was a need for a service, and the attorney said, my clients need this, and they decided to do it to help them. But they were offering that very narrow service I talked about, where it was checks in the mail, the agency took on the liability, and they were running it out of their attorney trust account. As the model advanced, it became harder and harder for the attorneys to deliver the service, and a lot of them got out of the business. The risk in that, and many of them have done it well for many years. The downside in the attorney model is that attorneys generally have an attorney-client privilege with the parents.
Yeah.
And it's a one-sided relationship where they have to viciously defend their client's interest, even if their client's wrong. So it's a
Right.
little bit more complex when if the IP says, because they're emotional upset, say, don't pay the surrogate because she unfriended me on Facebook, or she ate McDonald's, or was chewing gum. These are silly examples, but they really happen. And it's usually because it's such an emotional process. And they have a harder time saying, no, that's not in the contract. We're going to continue with the payment. So that conflict of interest, I think, is large, but some have done it and done it well. My thing with the attorneys, they have to meet the same standard of fund protection and checks and balances and security that the rest otherwise, because they're really just another company managing funds, and they need to have the right infrastructure or they're equally at risk. This year, we've also had an attorney that stole money. That's that model. Agency held, in my opinion, and it's not a popular opinion, I think agencies should never hold escrow. It's illegal in states that have modern and recent statutes, and it's banned for good reason. You can't be the party that matches everybody, that brings in all the professionals, that's guiding the overall process and holding the money and paying yourself. The risk is too high. And the agency actually serves as a huge component of oversight for escrow. Who's really watching escrow and working hand in hand with escrow to make sure the payments are there and available and going out? It's the agency. They serve as part of the security around an escrow company by keeping an eye on what the escrow company is doing.
Yeah. Well, I'm just trying to think of like an analogy here because does kind of remind me of like the real estate, the 2008 bubble, and the appraisal company was working for the bank. And
Right.
you're like, well, like, okay,
Yeah. Put that number wherever you want it, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think the problem is the temptation becomes too high, right? So for like an agency, if there's a downside and there's nobody watching, and maybe they started off good, but they have full with that level of control and access and lack of oversight, the temptation to do something wrong is high.
Well, how come you have it on the agency side, but that doesn't exist as much in your mind on the attorney side?
It does. It does. That's why I advocate for the same level of scrutiny, structure, and oversight for anybody holding escrow. The attorney piece, attorneys hold escrow as part of their business historically for as long as possible for their fees and other items. It usually doesn't warrant the level of complexity in dollars that surrogacy has.
I guess they also have their
And the one thing for an attorney is their livelihood and their license is on the
yeah.
risk, not just that business. All of them are at risk of going to jail. But no, I actually think attorneys, if you look up how many attorneys a year get disbarred for misuse of funds, it's alarming. So I just think whether you're a CPA, an attorney, an agency, there needs to be certain things in place to manage money securely, just so the risk of temptation, it goes away. You remove it.
Yeah.
So
why does an agency want to manage it as opposed to using a seed trust?
I think a lot of the agencies that manage escrow in-house have done it that way for a very long time before there was a good model. And think back to what I like to think of like the Wild Wild West when we came into the space.
Yeah.
The escrow companies created more problems than good. You had an escrow company that held the money. There was no transparency. There was no system. They were sending a check in the mail monthly, and the agency still had to do all the work of checking everything and submitting the request. And often when the agency said the surrogate hasn't received her check, what's happened, the escrow company would say check's in the mail, right? And maybe they got a monthly ledger that came out. So I personally think some of the attorneys and agencies that got into the business way back when that still do it today did it before there was a better solution. And then they haven't changed yet. Or unfortunate situations, they're bad actors and it gives them control and access that they wouldn't have otherwise. I think that was potentially the situation with some of the fraud cases we've seen.
Yeah, I'm just curious about that because if I'm an agency owner, I don't even want that potential liability near my agency. But the other thing is I'm just trying to like put myself in the other shoes. Like one, like maybe I get to like collect a little bit of interest on a large chunk of money, so that might be attractive. Or I don't have to like deal with anybody else. If I'm super control type A, I get to manage everything myself. I'm just trying to think why why wouldn't everybody go to a seed trust?
Yeah, I mean, there's some of the models that you have the all-in service and then they make money on every component. That's certainly a part of the reason for some, or they've always had that revenue line, so letting go of it's hard, or it's part of their fees, so they want to make money on it versus outsource it. And that's why in a lot of states you've had it banned. In California and in New York, there's very clear rules against it, and a lot of the states that have clear statutes that have matured or have clear things against it. So it's just where it is not banned, it does still happen. There are outliers who I think are some of those mega agencies that have a complete different level of infrastructure and financial teams in place and bonding that maybe you can look at that and say, look, if there's going to be an exception to it, that's the one.
Yeah.
But in general, it's not a best practice. There's really Surrog Connections, Vermont Surrogacy, Circle, and Northwest Surrogacy, to my knowledge, are the remaining agency held escrow models.
So
One
there's really only a few of them.
To my knowledge, there's only a few. There could be a few other small ones, and I think there are.
You know what I wonder? Because, like, it is so highly competitive to get surrogates, and so I'm just curious, like, as more surrogacy agencies pop up and it gets even more uber competitive, like, this is a potential revenue line, as agencies have a harder time getting matches or wherever they make their money if we see this happen more and more.
Yeah, from my perspective, what's needed is education. Escrow is often an afterthought, but like I said, because everybody's focused on the parents and surrogates are focused on their matching, they're focused on their doctor, finding the right agency, picking the right attorney, and this escrow component can be an afterthought. I always say it's the least expensive or one of the least expensive cost in surrogacy, but if you get it wrong, it'll be the most.
Wrong.
And trust me, I've worked with all those families who got it wrong when we've had to take their cases pro bono, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So to me, what's needed is education. And in every case of fraud we've had, if education was there and parents were informed of what should have been in place or to ask the right questions, they wouldn't have selected those providers. I think we've been pounding the table on that since we started and
Uh-huh.
putting out like, here's the areas. Like I don't care if I'm biased. I think SeedTrust is the best, and I will continue to drive every ounce of my energy to make SeedTrust the absolute best and continue to raise the bar from ahead since the beginning. But what I want is a rising tide lifts all ships, right? Like I'd love to see other escrow providers continue to do better, and we have seen that. What I want is every parent and surrogate that and donor that desperately deserve this process to be secure on the financial end to pick and end up at a financial provider that's secure,
Right.
whether that's SeedTrust or somebody else doing it right. And that's part of the reason why I agreed to lead the way in creating the seed standard for escrow. Because now it's not Adam and SeedTrust saying here's how it should be done. It's Seeds, the leading nonprofit and ethics organization in the space saying here's a standard that everybody can look to. And that standard was drafted by myself, a smaller independent escrow provider, a number of attorneys who hold escrow. And we put together what I consider to be a minimum standard lines, what should be in place for anybody holding money and what are prohibited practices. Now, I think if we can get the education out for parents to say, look to this standard, and if the money piece is not meeting that minimum standard, ask questions and probably move elsewhere. That's
Yeah.
what needs to happen. If you really looked at every single case of fraud, they weren't even close to meeting the standard. Most of them didn't have a single pillar of the standard in place. So,
But to your point, like the amount of houses I've bought and people are like, here, wire the money here. I'm like, okay. And I never even like, who am I wiring it to? Are they responsible? Do they have the pillars in place? Never even questioned it.
and look, if there's any silver lining in the fraud that we're seeing, I think that hopefully is an outcome that people do make sure that the right things are in place. I think that we hold professionals accountable in the industry because I'll just be very candid.
Yeah.
In the past, when I would say financial companies need to have bonding, they need to have audits, they need to have checks and balances and experienced leadership. People would just say, Adam, you're doing this for selfish reasons. It's not fair to the smaller operators. You're being a bully. And my argument was, no, I'll help the others get there. I'll actually give them the roadmap to get there, but they have to get there if they're going to manage people's money or the risk is too high. And what we've seen is the people that didn't raise the bar or didn't get there, it's because they couldn't. And then sometimes they couldn't because they were stealing. So,
Well, my question about that, because I heard those grumblings also, but I think I am curious because the seeds guidelines created a dollar amount for the insurance or for the bond. But why that as opposed to like just assets under management, like a percentage?
yeah, for sure. Maybe we can just talk about the standard as a whole. We can get into the bonding amount. And again, I think the standard is leveled out to be a minimum, right? Is it where I wanted it to be in terms of a high bar? It's not. What we tried to balance the committee, the group, the drafting group, and the committee tried to strike with the standard is what is a standard that is achievable for a smaller entity that still allows for competition and fairness, but also is high enough that protects people in light of all the misappropriation and fraud we've seen. That was the balance. Look, if we wrote the SeedTrust standard, it would be very hard for others to comply. So it's not that. But what I think it is, it's a fair minimum. So what are the areas of the standard if you really look at it? One area is that you have to have professional staff that's qualified to manage a legal financial company that's within the complexities of this industry. So what does that mean? You have staff that's qualified to decision these payments. Ideally, you have an attorney on staff. You have accounting staff, ideally a CPA, but not required, that can actually manage the complexity of the bookkeeping and the banking transactions because it's quite involved. And we didn't say you have to have like ultimate licenses there. Like the reason we didn't say you need to have an attorney because maybe that would be hard to achieve. But a guideline is that's a good best practice. But you have to have a qualified staff. No different than if you're going to pick an attorney or an agency, you want them to be qualified to do the job. If you look at some of the fraud that we've had, there's just zero qualifications. If you look at the most recent one that's going to hit the news, they weren't qualified at any capacity to manage people's money. Right? The next one, which is critical, which is bonding and insurance. There's so much confusion around this topic. People talk about general liability. I see escrow companies talking about, oh, you're protected because we have FDIC insurance. And people are like, yeah, they have FDIC. That's great. The reality of it is with a financial company in our space, what matters is your bond, your errors and omissions, and your cybersecurity. Those are the insurances that really matter, and I put them in order of priority. And the bond, which is interchangeable with a fidelity bond or a crime policy, what that does is that protects if somebody steals the money. And it's really important that the policies include the owners. So, and
Why
to your point that
do they often not include the owners?
insurance companies can carve that out. So you need to look at that. It is important to make sure that that is included because they're typically the ones
Appropriating.
do it, but not always. But yeah, when you look to the bonds, so we had a lot of dialogue around the bond size for the minimum standard. And again, I call it the minimum standard. I can't help myself. It's the escrow standard, right? But the $10 million number came into place because at 10 million, that's when insurance companies and bonding companies really start to underwrite. That's when they really start to pay attention. They start to evaluate the systems, the checks and balances, the procedures, and they determine it's a dollar amount for them that the risk is high enough that they're going to do detailed underwriting.
Yeah.
They're going to look at the owners, they're going to look at the structure, and they're going to determine for their shareholders, is it worth a $10 million risk? Below 10 million, and they're not going to spend the resources to underwrite. So that's why we picked 10 million. An ideal world, if there was monitoring in place, you could say a percentage of assets like you have in a bank or full coverage, but we don't have the ability at Seeds or in our industry to monitor how much is under management.
Mm. Mm.
So 10 million is a minimum that actually gives an indication that this company's been underwritten by an insurance company. They qualify for a $10 million bond, and therefore there is an indication that there is security. Roughly represents 20 to 30 times what would ever be held, right, in an escrow account. So they'd have to have a lot of accounts to hit 10 million.
How much does a $10 million bond cost? Ballpark.
It varies depending on the risk assessment. I would say they cost anywhere from $7,000 to $12,000, and maybe 15, right, if the risk is high.
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't be that high. So when people tell me 10 million's too high, 10 million's too hard to achieve, it's too expensive. If you can't afford a or even let's say a $12,000 insurance policy, you shouldn't be managing millions of dollars
12,000 a year or 12,000 a month?
a year.
Oh my, yeah, agreed. Yes.
So that's why, and then the difference, so that some of the smaller operators would say, well, gosh, it should be 5, or I'm only holding 4, it should be less. Well, I would say the difference in that policy is going to be just a few $1,000s.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be the minimum they're going to charge. So that's why I think 10 is the minimum. I think it gives a real indication that they've been looked at, that they're qualified. And by the way, if they can't get a bond, it's probably for good reason.
Okay, so it's really like the number is almost meaningless. It's the fact that it's the due diligence behind the number that is more meaningful.
Yeah, I would argue that for me, the due diligence is number one.
Yeah.
But if there is an event and there is theft, or even if it's just employee theft, $10 million is a lot of money. So
Right.
if an employee is able to steal, or there is a partial loss of the money, or a smaller operator goes under, there's also that fallback that there's $10 million in protection for people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like in the most recent one that's in the news, both of them, if they had that $10 million bond, every single dollar would have been repaid.
Yeah.
So why not have it in place? Again, I think it should be higher. I'd love to see a more rigid standard there, but at least that's something that you can look to say they're at least sophisticated enough and they're willing to make a $10,000 investment in insurance, and they've been underwritten and they're secure enough to get a $10 million bond. I think that gives you some peace of mind from the outside looking in.
So that's for internal misappropriation, or if somebody steals the money. But you also talked about was errors and omissions, and then also cyber.
Yeah, errors and omission is when there's a mistake. So if an escrow company makes a mistake, if they pay out something wrong and they want to make a claim on their insurance, then it's there to pay that out. Particularly important for a smaller company that a meaningful loss could put them out of business, so they would make that claim. And then cyber insurance is going to protect against that cyber attack and help them not only recoup the losses if there's a meaningful cyber attack, but also navigate it for a company that's not as tech savvy. And I will tell you, running an escrow company, we're under attack every day.
That was one of the questions I had for you. Is like all we're hearing about in terms of the stuff that goes wrong in escrow is on the internal fraud and theft side. But I'm curious about your point of view in terms of which one keeps you up more at night. I can guess what it is today, but I'm curious what you think it's going to be in the future.
You know what? What lets me sleep well at night is knowing that I have all these secondary protections in place, right? I am an extremely obsessive person in terms of how to make things secure and how to think through every avenue. Being in banking for 10 years, I watched people that I looked at eye to eye and I thought they were amazing people defraud their companies. So I'm like a trust nobody, put in the right systems and process type person. To give you an idea, I can't even move the money. I don't even trust myself. So because there just should be controls and checks and balances and redundancies at SeedTrust, it would take 4 to 5 people colluding to steal a dollar, and all 4 to 5 of those people would get caught in the audit. So even with that, I have the protections in place to say, look, what if somebody outsmarted me or found a loophole in my system? Then we have the secondary insurances and the reserves that we have, so there's that. But yes, look, the external threats are constant. Our systems are under attack. We got the same stuff everybody sees in phishing and so forth. And we not only have to be careful with what's happening with attacks on us, which we have extreme infrastructure and technology around at a bank encryption level. We follow all the same procedures we did when I was in banking. We also have to worry about our clients getting attacked and getting hacked and cracking in that way. So we're constantly thinking about that. The criminals are coming up with new schemes. Some of them are really good.
I know.
I wish they would apply that energy to doing good versus bad. But I wouldn't say one keeps me up, Erin, more at night than the other. I would say we work really hard to be diligent on both and trying to stay ahead of the curve. We've never had a claim on our insurance. We've never had a single claim on our errors and emissions. We've never had a single claim on our bond. And we've never had a single claim, period. And we've managed 30,000 cases successfully. So knock on wood, I think we've done a
No,
pretty good job, but also we reserve and deal with some of the issues before it gets
that
to the.
is something that you could like shout from the rooftops. And I just don't feel that people like know how significant that is. Cause I think you happen to work in an industry that people like just don't know that much about in terms of like, what does that mean to never have a claim like in 30,000 cases? Like that's really impressive. But I don't think people understand that fully.
Yeah, so I think the insurances and the protections there, again, it's two things. It's a form of confidence that anybody from the outside can see that they've achieved this. It also shows you character. Like we went and got the $10 million bond in the very beginning, and then we moved it all the way up to 100 million, not because not for competitive pressure. Like nobody else even has anything above 10 to my knowledge. When we got 100, nobody even had 5, I don't think. We do it because it's the right thing to do. And And that's an indication of what type of company people are running. If they're not willing to spend $10,000 to get a bond, don't put your money with them. If they're making an argument that the seat standard's too high for them to meet and it's not fair, don't put your money with them. You know, uh, I think the other thing within a financial company is what we just talked about a little bit with our checks. But I told you we have a multi-step approval process, but an escrow company, and this is part of the standard, has to have strong governance, internal controls, checks and balances, secure systems. And that's a whole bunch of business, banking, financial technology jargon, right? But it's really simple. If you're managing money, you need to have really secure checks and balances to make sure not one person or two people or even three can steal the money. Everything goes to a multi-step process for review and approval. And if that's in place, the likelihood of that internal theft or even mistakes is much lower.
Yeah.
That process of protection, if that's in place and it's governed by good systems that people can't go around it or bypass it, the money in the process is really secure. Now, people will say, well, gosh, Adam, that's a lot of infrastructure. I couldn't sleep at night without that infrastructure in place. I couldn't sleep at night knowing one person or two people even could ruin the dreams of all these families. And
Right.
I think that necessary infrastructure of checks and balances and controls needs to be in place. And that is part of the standard. It's something and it's clearly laid out and people should look to that.
Okay, but I think it's awesome. And I know you've heard this too. And I'm sure everybody on the Seeds board is like, eye roll. Yes, we know. Like, who's enforcing it?
Yeah, so we get that a lot at Seeds, and I think Seeds has a really amazing opportunity to be the ethics and trade organization that's setting standards and providing the education that this industry really deserves. And it's growing into that. When I started, there were no standards for anybody. And in the industry, when you look back 10 years ago, since I've been involved in Seeds, and I'm not saying it's due to me, but the seed have grown to have standards for agencies, to have a process to change those standards and make them evolve as the industry evolves. We've now started passing standards for other industry professionals like escrow, and we have mental health, legal, medical, and so forth in development now. As Seeds grows, right now our only charter is if you're bad or you're not in compliance with the standards and we get a grievance, we will kick you out of Seeds. You will lose your membership. That's a reactive process, much like the bar or the medical boards or ASRM. you have to be reported to be kicked out. What would be interesting, what I would personally love to see is to see seeds be more proactive to say, we now have all these standards. Our membership really means something in that we're checking in some capacity. Now, as a nonprofit organization that's all volunteer based, we have to figure out how to do that effectively, and we're working on that.
Technology.
Exactly. So, yeah. So, look, I'd love to see a more proactive monitoring. I would actually fund monitoring of escrow compliance. I just, I think, but
Exactly.
in the interim, education and membership, like, is important. I think in us making people, right now, people are going to attest that they're in compliance. And as these standards become more rigid and we're starting to check, bad actors will step out of Seeds. So the Seeds membership, if you're an IP or a surrogate, we have to market that to let people know, look to that list. If they're not on there, they're maybe not in agreement with standards that were really put in place to protect you.
Yeah, I'm positive that you heard this too, because we hear it too, and we're just talking, like, well, that agency over there doesn't blah, blah, blah. And we're like, well, is anybody like who's ringing the alarm bells then? But nobody wants to be the whistleblower.
No, I think you probably heard me say it. I think in this industry, this whole industry field, most people in this segment are purpose driven. They're here to help build families. Not many of them come from legal or business environments to where kind of hard conversations and accountability is normal. So I think the niceness of the industry sometimes can work against us, and we need to be more loud and hold each other accountable. And when somebody's not doing it right or not acting in the right way, or it's obvious that they're in a model that shouldn't exist, as a field, we need to stand up and say, guys, this is not, we need to educate people to say this is not it. Now, look, the reality of it is all of these situations get into slander and lawsuits. So we have to be careful, but accountability is extremely important. And in my opinion, having standards
Hmm.
that are then checked by an organization that monitors those standards and creates some kind of certificate or assurance of this agency in meeting these standards that people from the outside industry know that is meaningful. And at least there's a threshold there of they're doing the right things. People will be better off. Will it prevent bad actors? No. You have traffic laws and you have cops on the road and people are speeding and drinking and driving every day. You will still have bad actors, but it will limit them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that also then kind of dovetails into regulation. Because I mean, if like I start to get worried, I come from adoptions, super highly regulated. A lot of them are the wrong regulations or out of date regulations. So I think surrogacy has such an amazing opportunity to work with legislators to create the right regulations from the start. But it also makes me worried, like, oh man, like this. Here's another bad article that will be published that is terrifying for this industry in terms of its long term viability.
No, I couldn't agree more. Look, I'm a business person, not a regulator, right? So I don't know exactly how that looks, but I would tell you, and what we're trying to do with organizations like Seeds is self-regulate with the press and everything happening and the bad actors, especially stacked up as they have been. I'm extremely worried about it. I think your experience in adoption is a great example of how it can go the wrong way.
Hmm.
And maybe not with bad intent, but just a lack of true understanding of how it should be. Now, surrogacy is regulated. It's regulated on a state by state basis. Could it be better? Yes. Is it advanced more in some states than others? Sure. But what does a national regulation look like? I don't know. I just know that from what we as an industry can control is we can create standards and ethics and self-regulate, and we need to do it now. We need to do it quickly. And I personally believe those complaining against it are just going to get left behind because regulation of some sort or further regulation of some sort is inevitable. So,
Yeah, I mean, we used to have it in the adoption side. It's also regulated state by state, and every agency obviously has to go be licensed and is audited every year. And then every dollar is submitted via court order. Like I remember, like we wanted to pay for a cell phone plan, so and that had to go through a judge. So it's like if that's not necessarily what we want, I think there's an option now to start addressing it.
yeah, for sure. I've looked at the adoption model in terms of maybe even helping there on the escrow funds, very different. Yeah, look, I think there are, from an escrow standpoint, it's going to be interesting to see how it evolves from a regulatory standpoint. There's enough press, and I welcome regulation. We're constantly in communication and looking at what's available and what's coming. And I would anticipate that I don't know what it's going to look like exactly or what shape it's going to come in, but I'm anticipating regulation. And
I
that's
know.
why like I laugh when I hear somebody complain about a $10 million bond. You have to have $40 million in equity today to start a bank. So it's like, yeah, I think a lot of the stuff we're doing to push higher standards is really just getting us ready for what's to come.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Okay, so let's shift over to the technology side because I know you guys just hired a new CTO, right?
Yeah.
So that you clearly anticipate advancements in technology. Can you tell us about any of them or what you envision?
Oh, yeah, look, so we've had a large tech team since the inception of the business, constantly trying to innovate what we do. So we're 10 years into this. Our culture very much is a startup culture around innovation and constant improvement. So the future there is technology, right? A big part of that is we'll keep innovating new services and new ideas and new things we can do to improve our service or make other little niches of the industry better, or even what we're doing in our core segments and escrow and medical records. But technology and how we operate and how we become more efficient is critical. You know, my team would kill me for saying this on a podcast, but I want us to get our speed and our turn times and approval times down to 2 hours. That is actually impossible in today's world. It's
How long does it take?
It's we're always running between around 24 hours, and we've consistently done that, sometimes faster, sometimes slower. But there's volume, and then there's the complexity of the approvals, there's the back and forth that happens. So getting it truly to where you're operating on top of it fast enough to where you can do it within 2 hours is really hard with time zones and everything happening, right? So, but I think the way you potentially get there is with technology making you more efficient. And so that when we look to our major hire of our CTO, technology is evolving so fast. My good friend is a data scientist. He went to the best program in AI, and by the time he graduated, it was already dated.
Yeah.
So, and that was recent. That was this year. We looked and we hired way up to get a new CTO that comes from large, large technology background, that's really up to date with the latest in technology and AI, to can make sure to bring new ideas and new efficiencies to help us run better. The hope is, as we look to the future, technology is going to continue to be a part of it.
Yeah.
And I'm not of the belief that AI is not going to replace what we do. It's not going to replace what agencies do. It's certainly not going to replace that to the fullest extent. But what it could do, if done right and done securely, is it can make us all more efficient, and it can make this process more secure, and it can make the experience for users better. Right. So that's what we're constantly trying to figure out is there an environment within our core systems to use those technologies to make us better, to make it more secure. And also there's just a constant rebuilding and re-envisioning how we operate from a broad software standpoint. So
Yeah, I know. I mean, 10 years ago, technology compared to just the last 6 months, even it is night and day. So it doesn't sound like AI is a bad word over there in the Seed Trust Orchid Gather camp, which is great. And I think it sounds like you are of the same mindset that we are, where we think AI for good can create a lot more human time. And that's like human for people within agencies to spend with the actual humans going through this process versus doing the admin.
for sure. Yeah. Look, in full transparency, the knock against SeedTrust and everything we've built all along is we were creating technology that was dehumanizing the process. And because I would always argue that no, we're not. The technologies were moving redundant tasks and so you could focus on having the meaningful conversations and guiding people. And I don't think the current revolution around AI is any different. It's going to make us more fast and more efficient. And in an environment with rising costs, it's going to enable us to do it at a similar or lower cost point, which really matters. So yeah, no, I don't think AI is a bad word. I don't think AI is as powerful, is able to do what everybody thinks it can do today across the board. I think it still has its shortcomings. It's evolving quickly. Like every month, it's like quantum leaps in what it's capable of. I think the use of AI needs to be done thoughtfully and very carefully because it still makes mistakes. And I think every company needs to think about how they can thoughtfully use it to be more efficient and to do a better job, or they'll get left behind.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Okay, I feel like I've kept you for a really long time, so I'm gonna jump to our very favorite question that we always end every podcast with, and we call it the magic wand. And so if I gave you a magic wand and you could change one thing about how technology is used or escrow is done in surrogacy, what would it be?
If I had a magic wand today, and I was being realistic, I'd make surrogacy free for everybody, or I'd make it accessible and affordable to any person. Like, look, the magic wand equation, I'd probably take it too far. But if I could fix one thing that is actually achievable today, I would want to achieve an education to where people coming into our space could get the information and process the information to where they knew the difference between good and bad providers. I think I get so frustrated. And look, this is hot off of me working with multiple families today that got taken advantage of, and I'm really emotional about it. So, but those families had just a little bit of education and they truly knew how to select the right provider, in this case, escrow. But it could apply to agencies, it could apply to doctors, right? If they just knew exactly who to pick and why, and what questions to ask, so they actually could go through this process, this beautiful and amazing process securely, I think that'd be really impactful. And that's partly why I'm so passionate about for Seeds, because I want Seeds to lead the way in helping create a
You know,
platform
at
that,
the very minimum, Seed should create like this is me just being marketing person, but a badge of some kind. Like if the escrow companies can submit that they are adhering to guidelines and Seeds can audit, because there aren't that many escrow companies. Like that is actually an audit that Seeds could do. I know that they can't audit every agency because there's too many, but at least like some kind of badging system that the good seal of approval style.
I would really support and love to see something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
I think some kind of level of accreditation or qualifications, you know. I
Do you,
think the other thing I'd love to see fixed in our space is the perception. I think, so many people perception of surrogacy has always been tentative or questionable based on the movies, based on the perception of it being the celebrities, now based on the bad actors and the few troubled cases that make the news. What doesn't get covered is the thousands of families that are born annually, this dream of having a kid that wouldn't have otherwise been achieved, that is possible, and that for the most deserving people that are willing to make such an investment and fight so hard to build their family, that get to hold that baby and build their family, the thousands and thousands of journeys that go through really well, those dreams that come true in this country aren't covered, right? The surrogates who are superheroes in my eyes. I think what
mhm.
a surrogate does in terms of carrying a baby for a family and making that dream possible, I don't that's like in my eyes, they become superheroes immediately. And I can't even think of anything to liken it to other than like you donated a kidney or something that like an amazing life-changing thing you've done for somebody that you can never be that's so selfless and amazing that can never be taken from you.
Yes.
So these surrogates are doing this amazing thing and they also need to be protected. But the perception of our industry doesn't actually encapsulate the heart and soul of what we do and how much people care, because you have these few bad actors and we need to figure out how to deal with them. They exist in every industry, but within our industry, they receive outsized attention because what we do is so personal.
Yeah.
Today I had to like stop and look at the baby photos coming in to like be able to breathe. Just so upset talking to the families that were taken advantage of by the agency that took the money.
Yeah.
And just remember that in my head that this is the minority, not the norm.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more that there needs to be kind of a good PR campaign waged for surrogacy because I agree. It blows me away that people would give of themselves so selflessly.
Yeah, no, for sure. In my career, I've met some of the most amazing people working in this field, and I've watched time and time again people in this field, with this recent issue and the agency stealing the escrow. Look, we're donating our services. Our company will work all next year to make that money.
Yeah, that's really kind of you.
It's hundreds of thousands of dollars we'll donate to help these families. We're not alone. I think there's a list of at least 50 other providers willing to donate services to help them. And it's not to make money, it's because they really care, and we care about people. That's type that type of people doesn't exist in every field, and I think it's quite amazing, and we
Yeah.
should keep harnessing that, and that's the story we need told here. In my lens of the industry and what I've seen, all the cases that I was really worried about and all the companies that worried me that were managing money have now gone out of business. So at least, and honestly, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't predict things that are happening, but I can look at the landscape and say, I think there's an outsized risk here or there. And I think that most of those really large outsized risk environments that stand out to me at least are have now come out as a problem, unfortunately. But hopefully now we can, with the standard and with education, we can be more secure going forward.
I've got one more question for you. We call it escrow, but it's not necessarily escrow, right?
Yeah, I think
And is that why it's called Seed Trust? Because it's managed more like a trust company?
yeah, we modeled SeedTrust after a trust company at a bank, right? Like after how they operate with managing the money per under a fiduciary responsibility and per contract. Escrow, I think, is confusing because it likens it to much to like home buying escrow, which is a very different one or two transaction environment
Period of time.
for a very short period of time for a very specific case, release quickly. Yeah, so I think the word escrow is challenging. I would love to separate ourselves from escrow. I think of us more broadly as a financial company, but that's what it's called and that's what it's always been called. So it's hard to rebrand and change that.
Yeah.
But I do think today there are escrow companies that operate very basically like an escrow company would, and then there's companies operating more as a more advanced technology financial company doing it right. So I'd
Yeah.
love to figure out the marketing angle to redefine that in our industry in a way that's helpful. Right
Oh,
now, if I think if we change the name from escrow to anything else, it would just create confusion.
but don't do it. Not right now. Okay. Well, Adam, thank you for your time. I know that today is a stressful day, and thank you for what you're doing for those families too. That's very kind of Seed Trust. And so, if people want to reach out or contact you, where do they go?
Yeah, info at SeedTrust'sEscrow.com or Adam at SeedTrust'sEscrow.com, and we're here to help in any way we can.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to The Future of Surrogacy. If you liked today's episode, send it to a friend or a colleague that should hear it. And be sure to follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn to keep up with new episodes and behind the scenes updates. And if there's a topic you want us to cover or someone you think we should talk to, reach out. We'd love to hear from you. We'll see you next time.